Study Section 14. Nigeria's Foreign Policy during Olusegun Obasanjo's administration. Introduction. In this study section, you will examine the conduct of Nigeria's foreign policy during the administration of Olusegun Obasanjo as democratically elected president. It will highlight the features, challenges, and achievements of the administration in the conduct and administration of Nigeria's foreign policy. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study session, you should be able to highlight the basic feature of Nigeria's foreign policy under the Obasanjo administration, point out the tenets of new diplomacy in Obasanjo's administration. 1. Discuss the shift in Nigeria's foreign policy in the era. 2. Examine the challenges encountered in the administration of Nigeria's foreign policy during the period. Nigeria's foreign policy during Obasanjo's administration. As one would expect, Obasanjo's foreign policy was corrective against the backdrop of the need to reintegrate Nigeria into the international after the period of isolation brought by Abacha. Authoritarianism and area boy diplomacy of the Abacha's era made Nigeria an outcast state in the Committee of Nations. Though Abubakar's tenure recorded some success in bringing Nigeria out of a pariah status, his tenure was too brief to really finish the job of clearing Abacha's disorder, so the bulk of the duty was left for Obasanjo. The accession to presidency by Olusegun Obasanjo in May 1999 boosted Nigeria's already improving image. Obasanjo was well known to the international community, and he tried to use his personal profile to reach out to the outside world in what may be described as personality diplomacy. Thus, what is important is not only that President Obasanjo enjoys tremendous personal doubt abroad, but also that he continuously sought to transfer that personal clout into a national clout. The 1999 Constitution granted executive and exclusive authority to a range of issues, from the conduct of foreign affairs to defense, negotiation of treaties, foreign trade, and investments, etc. The Constitution also incorporated some degree of checks and balances to limit the abuse of power by the executive. For instance, the war and treaty provisions in the Constitution imposed significant limitations on presidential power by ensuring that responsibility was shared between the executive and legislative arms of government. In spite of these limitations, however, the former constitutional sources of executive authority point to the preeminence of the president in foreign affairs. With his assumption of office, President Obasanjo sought to actively cultivate the international community towards finding solutions to Nigeria's myriad domestic problems. When President Obasanjo assumed office, the economy was in shambles, poverty was pervasive in the country. Internationally, Nigeria had become a pariah state, shunned by many countries, tolerated by a few, and treated with contempt and condescension by all. The country carried a heavy burden of international debt, and there was economic mismanagement on a colossal scale. The Obasanjo administration sought to stimulate a conducive environment for foreign policy formulation and implementation by attempting to put in place policies aimed at consolidating the emerging democracy, enthroned good governance, rule of law, and respect for human rights, as well as poverty alleviation and the economic empowerment of the people. Tenets of the new diplomacy. Drastic changes in Nigeria's peacekeeping effort to avoid excessive financial burden of such effort. The country's peacekeeping contingent will now come under the blue beret of the UN. The African continent will be galvanized for economic cooperation through equity participation in joint effort. Review of Nigeria's bilateral agreement to make it more relevant to the new foreign policy thrust. Adoption of a concentric circle policy which places premium on partnership with international organizations like G77, which comprises small and medium power countries for problem solving and strategic planning. The opening of new missions in medium countries like Singapore, Mexico, Greece, Ukraine, Lebanon, Thailand, Turkey, and a consular in Bangladesh to enhance South-South economic cooperation. Attuning Nigeria's development aid to domestic reality by de-emphasizing cash in favor of locally sourced materials towards stimulating the economy and protecting jobs in the country. Attracting investment and campaigning for debt relief ranging from debt rescheduling to total write-off, recovery of stolen public funds from foreign accounts, etc. Shift in the nation's foreign policy. The central focus of Nigeria's foreign policy shifted from Africa to the global arena. The entire globe and North Africa was to be the canvas of Nigeria's exertions. Nigeria's foreign interest was seen to extend beyond concern for the well-being of Africa. The plan was to win more friends for the country, attract investment, and address the debt burden. This was not to say that Africa was no longer relevant in Nigeria's foreign policy, but Nigeria's economic interest was to be a major determinant of its African policy. The shift from Africa as a centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy to globalism was to not be interpreted to mean that Nigeria had lost interest in the affairs of her immediate neighbors in the sub-region and the continent in general. The administration attached great importance to the goal of regional cooperation and integration, and it placed great emphasis on Nigeria's relations with countries within the West African sub-region, which ECOWAS was to remain a major pillar in the architecture of African integration. The Obasanjo administration's shift from Africa as a centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy to globalism was, however, not an indication of Nigeria's non-interest in the affairs of Africa. The relevant point of the new trust was that Nigeria was poised to benefit more from globalism than in previous years. Also, the new trust of Nigeria's foreign policy was to regain respectability and relevance in the international community, convert foreign policy activities into concrete achievements which are of direct benefit to Nigeria. The main objective is peace, security, and prosperity through friendship. The goals to be achieved are economic integration of ECOWAS, responsibilities in multilateral organizations, UN, AU, Commonwealth, OPEC, NAM, and G77, and cooperation with the Far East, promotion of foreign investment, and debt cancellation. The significance of the new thrust of Nigeria's foreign policy under Obasanjo was a reversion to economic diplomacy and an adoption of a beneficial and constructive concentric circle policy. The emphasis on economic diplomacy emanated from the perceived failure of the past foreign policy endeavors to deliver in economic terms, whilst concentricism placed premium on sectors where there were development funds and technical assistance. Very early after his election as president and even before inauguration, Obasanjo embarked on trips abroad where he lobbied for and insisted on support from the international community, debt forgiveness, debt rescheduling, and repatriation of stolen public funds which were being held in foreign banks, and a reposition of Nigeria in the community of nations. Progress was made in various respects, including the government's promise and determination to pay off all of Nigeria's outstanding debt and build up the country's foreign reserves. These two options attracted strong criticisms as they did not in any dear times transform the lives of Nigerians in terms of access to social infrastructure, employment opportunities, and reduction in the rate of inflation. When the Paris-based Financial Action Task Force (FATF) blacklisted Nigeria as a destination for investment capital on account of the alleged absence of guarantees for the integrity of investment in the country, the federal government came up with the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission (EFCC) with a wide-ranging mandate to inquire into all manner of economic crimes. President Obasanjo followed up the work of the commission by preaching zero tolerance for corruption and by further strengthening the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission (ICPC) and the Code of Conduct Bureau. An office of due process was introduced in the presidency to vet contract processes in government and to insist on laid down rules and regulations and prevent abuses. Obasanjo's anti-corruption drive and the establishment of anti-corruption commissions, though subject to criticism within the country, further enhanced the country's image. As evidence of his administration's acceptance by the international community, President Obasanjo paid state visits to the major capitals of the world, including Washington, Paris, London, and Japan. He also hosted a number of world leaders, including President Clinton, Chirac, and Queen Elizabeth II. Nigeria was readmitted to the Commonwealth in 1999, and she hosted Shogun in 2003. President Obasanjo took over the leadership of G77 and sought to reposition the country within the South-South group and to advocate for closer cooperation between developed and developing countries and the revamping of the North-South dialogue while forging South-South cooperation. The president, engaging in the promotion of coalition strategy, focused the Organization of African Unity (OAU), the Non-Aligned Movement (NAM), and the G77 to take the message of the South as one group to the G8 in Japan. By this move, African leaders succeeded in passing on the message to leaders of the North that the African crisis had to be seriously addressed and attended to, and the leaders of the G8 had a role to play in resolving the crisis. Nigeria remained an active member of the UN, canvassed for UN reforms and a permanent seat for Nigeria on the United Nations Security Council if it was reformed and enlarged as other continents were demanding. In the area of continental multilateralism, Nigeria played a leading role in the transformation of the Organization of African Nations (OAU) to the African Union and in devising the new Partnership for Africa's Development (NEPAD), an essentially African homegrown solution to the problems devastating the continent. In pursuit of good governance, Nigeria was instrumental to the introduction of the African Peer Review Mechanism (APRM) and subjected herself to peer review in 2007. Under the Obasanjo administration, Nigeria continued to remain a prominent actor in peacekeeping both at the international and continental level. In particular, Nigeria played vital roles in peacekeeping and conflict resolution in the ECOWAS sub-region and was actively involved in finding peace in the troubled and distressed part of Africa, particularly in places like Côte d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea-Bissau. In terms of bilateral relations, Nigeria signed bilateral agreements to foster commercial, economic, industrial, and technical cooperation with diverse countries like Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Japan, China, Britain, France, Canada, Cuba, Brazil, Ghana, and Sao Tome and Principe. Though many expected a more global-centric foreign policy during his 8-year administration, Obasanjo got more embroiled in the African agenda as the thrust of his foreign policy clearly was solving continental problems. Effort to attract foreign investment was hampered by unpleasant development constrained by the complex nature of Nigeria's domestic political arena, which was characterized by social and political strife, ethnic clashes, and tension in the Niger Delta. Indeed, between the new foreign policy direction of economic diplomacy and beneficial concentricism, the real question for Nigeria leaders was how to ensure that Nigeria continued to remain a prominent actor in the international arena, how she would project the gains and opportunities in ECOWAS, the AU, NEPAD, the Commonwealth, and the UN, as well as in the area of conflict prevention and peacemaking into the foreign policy domain. Obasanjo's foreign policy objectives were laudable, but what most critics were against was the president's approach. He embarked on shuttle diplomacy campaigning for debt relief, recovery of stolen public funds, and foreign investment. According to official sources, the president, at mid-August 2002, traveled out of the country for 113 times since he took over the leadership of the country at the end of May in 1999, and as at June 2002, he had been out of the country for a period of 340 days Akindele 2005. The implication of this is that in a period of 3 years, the president had been out of the country for a combined period of a year less 2 weeks. President Obasanjo practically managed the country's foreign policy from his office between 1999 and 2007. With Olusegun Obasanjo as the president, external affairs ministers seemed to be nothing more than the president's companions on foreign trips. Critics maintained that a better approach would have been to create favorable investment climate by addressing the numerous domestic problems. The way to do that is to sit at home and fix Nigeria first. No investor will be attracted to a country where there is insecurity, epileptic electricity supply, bad roads, and very weak infrastructure. With the basic infrastructure in place, Nigeria will naturally attract the best of investors given the country's large population and strategic position in West Africa. Challenges of the era. Nigeria's foreign policy was constrained by the complex nature of its domestic political arena. Obasanjo's handling of the Bakassi case with Cameroon at the International Court of Justice (ICJ), in which Nigeria lost the lost oil-rich peninsula, was seen as a diplomatic blunder. Unfortunately, his efforts, especially in attracting foreign investment, were hampered by unpleasant developments within Nigeria characterized by social strife, ethnic clashes, and tension in the Niger Delta. Study Session Summary. In this study session, you learn that Obasanjo pursued a corrective foreign policy to redeem the dented image of Nigeria mainly caused by Abacha. He anchored his policy on attracting foreign investment, seeking debt relief, restoring relationship with the great powers, and aligning Nigeria with the currents of globalization. Obasanjo succeeded in improving the international perception of the country and securing debt relief for the country. Obasanjo, however, lost the Bakassi Peninsula to Cameroon at the International Court of Justice (ICJ) in a case many believed was properly handled by the government. This is the end of Study Section 14. Thanks for listening.